Namaskar. My greetings to Mr. Samir Saran, President of the ORF, representatives of ORF America, the Rwanda Governance Board, and all participants at the Kigali Dialogue. At the outset, I wish to felicitate the organizers of the Kigali Global Dialogue for its success. In its third edition, the dialogue has developed into a recognized annual platform that brings together policymakers, academics, civil society representatives, and the private sector from around the world. A collaborative forum such as this is a typical example of what the world needs today. The global uncertainty that characterizes the current international situation as the world grapples with the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and an unprecedented crisis in Ukraine requires discussion, introspection, and out-of-box ideas that could form the basis for possible solutions. This is especially important given the fact that the impact of these global challenges is most heavily borne by countries of the developing world, including in Africa and India. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi's call for an inclusive agenda under our G20 presidency has to be seen in this context. Friends, India's position as G20 president embodies the very core that its presidency is based upon: inclusivity. As a G7 partner, a member of the Quad, BRICS, and the SCO, India is in a unique position to act as a bridge between the developed and developing worlds. Our priorities while heading the G20 are to shape an inclusive, sustainable global future and to share India's best practices across sectors. This ambition was set in stone by Prime Minister Modi in Bali last year when he said that India's G20 presidency would be, and I quote, inclusive, ambitious, decisive, and action-oriented, unquote. Friends, the theme of India's G20 presidency, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future, is drawn from the ancient Sanskrit text of the Maha Upanishad. This concept, rooted in an inclusive, collaborative world, finds resonance in African culture as well. Consider the African philosophy of Ubuntu, a concept in which your sense of self is shaped by your relationships with other people. It is a way of living that begins with the premise that I am only because we are. It suggests that whether it is Africa or India, there is abiding faith in the power of communities and the strength of togetherness, that a common embrace of cooperation and harmony with fellow human beings and with nature as well is the way of the world. Hence, you can see that African values are at the heart of India's G20 presidency. It is with such values in mind that India has defined the key priorities for its G20 presidency, which include technology transformation and digital public infrastructure, gender equality and women-led development, multilateral institutions for the 21st century, accelerated, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth, lifestyle for environment, green development, and climate finance, and accelerating progress on the SDGs. Friends, India's inclusive approach followed under its presidency is a mere extension of its existing domestic approach to development and progress, delivering financial services to the last mile to the most underprivileged has been one of the key priorities of the government right from the start. Take digital public infrastructure, for instance. It has enabled the government to deliver the benefits of development directly to citizens in all parts of the country and has achieved this goal in a transparent, smooth, and corruption-free manner. Friends, one of the first meetings India organized after taking over the G20 presidency was the Voice of Global South Summit in January this year. As Prime Minister Modi said in his opening remarks to the summit, India's aim in organizing this was to amplify the voice, concerns, and challenges faced by the Global South. Prime Minister Modi also emphasized on the importance of South-South cooperation and collectively shaping the global agenda. Friends, this global agenda is incomplete without Africa. This year's G20 under India's presidency has high participation from Africa, with South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Mauritius, and Comoros as active participants in all G20 meetings. Among the key outcomes of the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting were development cooperation, multilateral reform, and deepening cooperation between the G20 and Africa. A global initiative aimed at a human-centric international system that India and Africa are part of is the International Solar Alliance, or the ISA. African countries have a significant role in the success of the ISA. The ISA Secretariat is setting up large-scale solar projects of 500 megawatts each in several African countries. It is also working to build solar water pumping systems in at least 9 African countries and establish solar training application and research centers in 6. Friends, to paraphrase what Prime Minister Modi said so eloquently in his speech to the Ugandan Parliament in 2019, India's priority is not just Africa. India's priority is Africans, every man, woman, and child in Africa. India-Africa ties are multifaceted, covering economic, diplomatic, and defense domains, among others. Under the specific guidance of Prime Minister Modi, our political engagement has intensified as never before. In the past decade, our engagement with Africa has seen a significant increase, with not a single country in the continent that has not had at least a ministerial visit from India. Friends, India and Africa are also united by the common goal of eradicating poverty, achieving sustainable development, promoting peace and harmony, and improving the quality of life of the people. All of these are key priorities of the G20, especially under India's presidency. This partnership drives the South-South cooperation to build a truly multipolar world order which is more responsive to the aspirations of developing countries. The people of India and Africa together represent a third of humanity, a demographic dividend that has to be used wisely. The Indian and African economies also represent 2 of the world's most dynamic economic growth stories. Many of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa, and the combined GDP of the continent is $2.4 trillion. By 2030, Africa will represent almost a quarter of the world's workforce and consumers. With 54 countries, a billion people, a youthful demography, and abundance of resources, Africa will count for a lot and will carry our planet's hopes and responsibilities. While addressing the Indian community in Berlin in May 2022, Prime Minister Modi said, out of the total real-time digital payments that took place throughout the world in 2021, 40% took place in India. Friends, relative technological backwardness is one of the most important causes holding the developing world from high economic growth rates. India's expertise in digital and clean and green technologies can help benefit African nations, especially against the backdrop of India's achievement of financial inclusion of its entire citizenry. As our Prime Minister has said, India, as G20 President, stands ready and willing to help our fellow developing countries, especially in Africa, in their development journeys in any way we can. India is happy to share our experience, know-how, and best practices with the world to take us all forward collectively on our 2030 vision of sustainable development goals and empower our people. We are equally willing to be inspired by African and other fellow developing nations. Undoubtedly, there are experiences from each of our countries that we can share and learn from, and together we can facilitate a collaborative world order. By firmly believing in inclusivity and taking everyone on board in the path towards growth and prosperity, India has shown what it means to lead by example. I thank you for your attention.